All right, we are starting our afternoon session, and the first speaker is Ernesto Lubercio, who is going to tell us about moduli in quantum toric geometry.
Thank you so much, Tony. Well, the title is a generic title. And my talk is really just glue. It's an informal, light, entertaining talk, trying to explain how we go from. So this is a work that with Ludmil, should be there, Kyung-So, Noga, myself. And Noga talked about the first part of the paper, and Kyung is going to talk about the last part of the paper, right after me. And so I have to talk about the middle part. But the middle part is always the most boring. So I'm just going to, rather than give a lot of technical details, I'm going to tell you how psychologically we came about just even asking some of these questions. So it's a little bit of a historical entertainment that just puts the idea that would put you in the mind frame to ask some of these things. And of course, it's been an evolution of ideas in time and different pieces of work. Even I don't mention some work with Daniel that we're doing right now. Partially mentioned in the talk. So it's work from on several fronts that kind of put you in the mood for this kind of questions. So, let's start by perhaps the most elementary part of this story, that is the so-called SandPy model. So the SandPy model, you have this table, and you have this squares on the table, just tessellated on little squares, very little squares. They are meant to be very small. And at the square Hj, you imagine you have Hij grains of sand. Hij grains of sand. So the number of grains of sand at the square Ij is Hij, therefore it's Hij is valued in 0, 1, 2, 3 in the 0 and natural numbers. So it's just 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hij could be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so the rule is that if one of these squares, so it's a universe, it's a state of the universe. And one of these squares has 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 grains, but not 0, 1, 2, or 3. If it has more than or equal than 4 grains of sand, it's unstable, and it wants to donate 4 grains to its neighbors, and it does. Spontaneously donates 4 grains to its neighbor. And every square that is bigger than 4 does this. And luckily, it doesn't really matter in which order this happens. So these squares donate to its neighbors, and the final outcome of this process will not feel in which order this process occurs. So this is the rule. We have a configuration. Huh?
Less sense doesn't make sense. Feeds into all sides of space.
Yeah.
Assuming they all eventually stable.
Yeah, I have to explain that. The table is actually finite. I said Z2, but it's meant to be a very large region, and sand could fall from the table. And if sand falls, it doesn't come back, and so this ensures that everything does become stable sooner or later. So you have this compactification at infinity, where sand just disappears. You can do it at infinity, or you can do it on a finite region. Okay. This is a beautiful problem for high school kids. It's a beautiful problem to show that it doesn't depend on the order of filing, of toppling. One of these states, when it donates to its foreign neighbors, is called a toppling. And it could happen in many possible orders. And it is surprising but true that the final state does not depend on the order of toppling. And that's why this one, what they call is the an abelian SandPy. That's what some people call this an abelian sum. And so it is interesting. So let's see what happens. So here we have an initial state. It's a small table. It has only 9 tiles. Too bad, but it's that kind of thing. But it has 2 unstable places. 2 unstable places. And so one of the unstable places fires, it doubles. And now there's still 2 unstable places. And then you have this state after 1 fire. And then you fire and fire and fire, double and double and double and double. Every time you find a 4 or 5 or bigger than 3, you double, and you find the final state. And that's the final thing. And it does not depend on the order of the fire. That's okay. Now, but the interesting part is that as Anderson, a different Anderson, said, more is different. So now what happens if you have a table, very large table, really large table, and you have 10 to the 9, 10 to the, well, I said billion, but it's not, 10 to the 12 grains of sand, 10 to the 12 grains of sand, billion is not 10 to the 10 to the 12 grains of sand. You have 10 to the 12 grains of sand, and now you let it happen. It takes a long time. It definitely takes a long time, this process. And the final state is, rather than putting numbers, it is going to be a huge matrix of numbers. And the final state could only be 0, the values 0, 1, 2, or 3. I'm going to use 4 colors rather than 4 numbers for the final state. And this is the final state. I don't know if we can turn this slide off a little bit. No, we can't. Well, it is an extremely intricate structure that has this fractal-like feeling, this Apollonian circle packing, this of the circle and the Apollonian circle packing, and something is going on. So, a lot of what we're doing in our work could be construed, be interpreted as an attempt to understand what is going on. It's very mysterious what is going on. It has many moving parts, and it could be construed as an attempt to understand this picture that is a very mysterious picture. It is what they call emergence, in that you have just this very simple rule. And then, wow, all of a sudden you have this. It's too bad you cannot see it, but it's incredibly beautiful and intricate structure, full of triangles on top of triangles and things. And then you can zoom on this structure and zoom on this structure and see more and more stuff going on. So we want to understand what is going on. And there's some things which you can rapidly understand. So you say, well, say I have this final state, but then I keep perturbing it. I keep putting a grain of sand and letting it relax. And then at random, anywhere, uniform random distribution. Grain of sand and let it relax. Grain of sand, let it relax. Grain of sand, let it relax. Grain of sand, let it relax. So that I start to see this as some sort of dynamical system. And it happens to be the case that some states, if you do this an infinite amount of time, some states appear with positive probability and some states appear with probability 0 in the long run. In fact, all of them, the ones that appear with positive probability, surprising, appear with the same probability, so to speak. It's a finite thing. And so it's a finite table for no matter how large it is. States appear with positive probability. And these ones are called the recurrent configurations. And the other ones are, you throw them away. You say, well, from the physical point of view, I will never see the other ones. So I will only consider recurrent configurations. I only consider ones that keep appearing in this kind of process. And it turns out that the recurrent configurations form an abelian group. But this is a slightly surprising operation because the operation is you add the matrices and you relax. And let me tell you why this is surprising. This is the only group in mathematics I know of where it's very hard to compute the identity element. It is the only group in mathematics I know of where it is very hard to compute the identity. Because you would say the identity, this guy is an expert now in computing, studying the identity very seriously. You would say 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 is the identity. But remember that that's not a recurrent state, that's an infinitely unlikely state. So that doesn't count. You cannot put 0, 0, 0, 0. So you have to compute a state that is a recurrent state. That it's an impossible thing, isn't it? You have to put it on top of any other state, a recurrent one, not a non-recurrent one, by the way, this phase or a non-recurrent state. And relax, and you see this city here of Hassan. So you got this configuration of sun, and then it just disappears, and you stay with what you started with. It sounds like an impossible thing. But you get that identity for a square thing. And you are happy studying the shapes, and you even program a machine learning model to try to predict the identity of Daniel over there. And this is the identity of this group. And of course, we want to understand the scaling limit. And we want to predict what we're going to find in the identity. For example, we want to understand mathematically, not just on the computer. We want to understand mathematically how you would describe the identity. And we have some things. We know, for example, now that these are hyperbola, we can, et cetera, emergent hyperbolas over there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Nevertheless, you can see there some funny, the triangles have some funny noise in form of straight lines. You can see, you have these little straight lines on the triangles, and that's what sends you into quantum geometry.
What color is 0?
What is what?
What color is 0?
I don't remember, sorry. Green is 3. Do you remember what is 0? Huh? 0 is red. 0 is red. 0 is red. Very little. And again, too bad you cannot see, but if you take this thing that landed from 1 billion grains of sand, and you see the triangles and you zoom on them, you start seeing that they look like these triangles with these graphs inside. They have these graphs inside. And these graphs satisfy the so-called balancing condition. And this so-called balancing condition is a typical condition to call these graphs a tropical curve. So somehow, there are these tropical curves inside the triangles of this state. So what is going on? Okay, well, part of the puzzle has been resolved. This is from a paper with Aldo Guzman, and Julian Prieto, and Vera Kalinina, Nikita Kalinin, and Mrs. Kolikov. And in this picture here, what we do is look at we get a table and we put a heavy state on the table. 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, everywhere. So that now is the latest, the heaviest state that is stable, the heaviest state that is stable. And now we're going to but this state is not recurrent. It is stable but not recurrent. So we have 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, and now you're going to try to make it recurrent, adding grains of sand, continue, and see how you get to a recurrent state as you put more and more grains of sand at random various places. And what happens is when you do that, you see what happens. And now we have the movie by Nikita Kalinin. You put sand, you put sand, you put sand, you put sand, you put sand. That's the process. That's the process. Square table, stand at those places. Not that there, that on the table, but stands at those places. When more cycles in the curve, more cycles and more cycles, homology. So that's what the picture was meant to do. Now you have a feeling for the dynamics of this linear part of the system. But of course, this is the piecewise linear part of the system, the tropical sector of the system. There is a piecewise quadratic sector of the system. And Shkolnikov and Kalinin and Shkolnikov solved the linear part of the system. These are simulations, but they could prove that this is a theorem, that this happens. Always, that this always happens. They proved a theorem that says this always happens. And well, I will just assume that in this audience I don't have to say much about what is a tropical degeneration. You have these kind of equations for the curves, and then you do the tropical degeneration. But this is what it looks like. You have the actual holomorphic curves on, say, CP2. And if it is of degree 1, well, it intersects every divisor of infinity once, as in the first little thing. But if it is of degree 2, it has to intersect every divisor of infinity twice, like in the second thing. And so, and the thing is that one always write the equation, but if one wants to know what this looks like, one should grab the shadows in log-log axis. So you grab the shadows in log-log axis, and then you get that the essential combinatorics of the intersection theory of these curves are described by these graphs that are called the tropical curves, the tropical degeneration that encodes the essential combinatorics of the intersection theory are very vividly proves the theorem of Michalki in circa 2000. It encodes this intersection theory in a very faithful manner, this tropical theory. So you can think of, at least theory speaking, that these to me that we did with these triangles, these were, say, for example, CP2s. They were the moment map image of CP2. And that these graphs that we're seeing in the sample in between are some sort of holomorphic curves when seen in the tropical degeneration. So you have this some sort of holomorph. So what the system is doing, that movie that we were watching, is solving some sort of, it's finding a holomorphic curve that is passing through the desired points. So it's certainly the tropical curve, but it's a holomorphic curve passing through the, so the sample knows how to solve this problem of finding the holomorphic curve that passes through the specified points. So that's nice, you have the tropical degeneration. But now there's a little bit of a puzzle, isn't it? The sample doesn't care whether the table is circular. I mean, it not only works Of course, I'm taking the scaling limit where the tiles are tiny, tiny, tiny. And then I prove that then it's a tropical curve. In the scaling limit, square root of n, etc., in the scaling limit. And it's one of the very few terms in mathematics, in my opinion, which there is a proof of the scaling limit and a complete proof of the scaling limit. There's a complete proof of the scaling limit in the tropical sector. But it's partly, I have these holomorphic curves living in the historic varieties. But the sample doesn't care whether the polygons are rational or not, whether it's a round table or an elliptic table. Even it doesn't care about convexity. But I will assume a convex table in what follows. We have ideas to deal with a non-convex table, and then we have to do with this broken line convexity and cluster formalism. So you have to use this kind of cluster formalism to go to the non-convex thing, but it's not something that we have done. In any case, in the convex thing.
What is the limit as the table becomes very large? It should be more symmetrical.
As the table becomes, as the styles become very little.
Whatever. Just let the table. I mean, this is destroying the symmetry of the circle. So it's wrong. Sort of wrong, but if you took a limit, it's because things are finite. Take a limit, it's not finite. Then it has to be perfect.
There's a broken symmetry. Here you have to integrate. Well, the equilibrium is a graph that branches and branches and branches, and it goes into exactly every irrational point of the circle, and it misses exactly every irrational point of the circle. Exactly every irrational, and means exactly every irrational point. But yeah, this is a very good question. You can average over SL2R. And we have some results in that direction, but that's a different talk. The averaging over SL2R. This is just like that. And so then you would say, well, if I want to really understand these holomorphic curves and whatnot, I really need to generalize the theory of toric varieties from rational polytopes to irrational polytopes. At least, and then more general complex bodies. But the first step is to generalize from rational polytopes to irrational polytopes, to be able to have understand this phenomena of these holomorphic curves, etc., in a more general setting. And the generalization of theoric geometry from rational moment polytopes to irrational moment polytopes is quantum theoric geometry. The situation is as follows, as was described in the talk by Logara, the previous talk. When the polytope is rational, yes, you get a classical toric variety. But when the polytope is irrational, you get this irrational fan in the dual directions, and then you get a quantum toric variety. A toric variety is a compactification of a torus, C star cross C star cross C star cross C star. A quantum toric variety is a compactification of a quantum torus that is a non-commutative space. So for rational polytopes, you get classical commutative space toric variety. For irrational polytopes, you get a generalization that is called compactifications of the quantum tori, and they are the quantum toric varieties. So we have the moment map, and the idea is that the moment map constructs out of tori, construct the toric variety and the combinatorics of the polytope. And now we are going to be able to glue the things when the polytope is irrational. What we do is we have to replace the tori in this picture for quantum tori, or non-commutative tori, for quantum tori. So we replace all the tori in this picture by all these quantum tori, and now we can glue them appropriately. We can get a global object, and that's a quantum tori variety with a moment map into an irrational polytope. And this theory is in our paper with Alberto, and in our papers with Alberto. And so, well, the basic idea is to replace all the tori appearing in classical toric geometry with quantum tori. Well, this is a review of the situation. We are going to really not do it on the polytope language, but on the fan language that's better in many ways. Certainly for the complex geometry, what we're concerned about today, primarily. We don't have a preferred choice of the symplectic form, so to speak. But what is this quantum tori that I'm going to be gluing? Well, traditionally, people say that the quantum tori is related to this non-commutative algebra. Typically, it's thought of as an algebra of operators in space, and they don't commute. They kind of almost commute, but they don't commute. So it's y equals e to 2 pi I h bar y x. And h bar, it's really the h bar in quantum mechanics. This is the exponential form of the relation that appears in the Born, Heisenberg, Jordan papers. But it's the version a year later by Hermann Weyl, 1926, 1927. Talking about 100 years, we're talking about around the time that Lefschetz was publishing his great results in 1924, 1925. So this is around the time of this excitement with Lefschetz on geometry and in physics with this kind of thing, same time. So this is the 1927 operator expression. And there is a dichotomy for the parameter H, in that this algebra has to be thought of only up to so-called Morita equivalents, but we really care in the category of modules, the algebra. Maybe each representations really we're seeing as operators. So two algebras that differ by something will have the same category of representations. They are called Morita equivalent. And when H is rational, this is really a commutative algebra in terms of these categories are identical to that of a commutative. It's Morita equivalent to a commutative algebra if and only if H bar is rational. When irrational, it's a bona fide non-commutative situation. And it's already very good for the toric case, isn't it? Because in the rational case, we want to get commutative spaces. And in the irrational case, we want to get non-commutative spaces. So the fact that the quantum torus already have this property is not a bad thing. So, so we have this arithmetic dichotomy. And Alan Kohn provides kind of coordinates for the quantum torus that are extremely convenient. So he considered the Kronecker foliation of a slope h bar depicted here. He considered the Kronecker foliation holonomy h bar, and then the quantum torus is meant to be the algebra of functions on the space of leaves of this foliation. Slightly more accurately, is Morita equivalent to the convolution algebra of the holonomy groupoid of this foliation. You take the holonomy groupoid of this foliation, and now you get the convolution algebra, and that by not literally but by Fourier form gets you the Weyl algebra presentation of the quantum torus. So, so that the Kronecker foliation can be thought of as coordinates for the quantum torus. So the Kronecker foliation gives you coordinates for the quantum torus, and it was something fun that we figured out in NJ once with Laura, that this foliation that he talked about in his talk, in the previous talk, when you just restrict it to tori, are these Kronecker foliations. So this foliation that he talked about was a foliation, was this foliation that the LBM manifold came with. But if you look at tori inside the LBM manifold, it was a bunch of Kronecker foliations glued together appropriately on the tori. So this foliation realized the LBM manifold as a bunch of quantum tori exactly with the combinatorics of the polytope. That is this polytope that he was drawing, that was the one that he was taking off the bonds and he was getting the polytope, the so-called gay dual, or I don't know what you should call it, from the lambda datum. So this was a big surprise for me, at least, that this foliation that was in principle potentially complicated or hard to imagine was a union of chronicle foliations of the LBUM. So that was the thing. So we do the stack thing to kind of make this precise. And very little remark is that you will have 4 avatars for the quantum torus if you are doing this kind of formalism. You get the groupoid, the non-commutative algebra, the C-star algebra, that people in non-commutative geometry will refer to often as the quantum torus. But then you get, well, the groupoid will you get the stack, that is what we're working with for paper. And then you get the Morita-Quillings class, or the category of modules over the non-commutative algebra will be another avatar for the quantum torus. We're working in coordinate, so to speak, with the stack, because we have very nice models. So we can work with the stack, and you could apply any of these functors and go to any of the other places. In fact, with the groupoid very often, because we really have very nice coordinates that Laurent was writing in his talk very explicitly. So we can write very explicitly the groupoids involved in this story. So you get that. And of course, it is a very natural thing. If you see the foliation for the quantum torus, you get that to get that transversal circle. It's a very natural thing to say, well, the R action on the 2 torus is the same as to have a rotation on the transversal. It's kind of the same dynamical system, contains the same amount of information as a dynamical system as the rotation. And of course, rational rotations on the circle and irrational rotations on the circle are very different kind of animals. So that's what this is what this is trying to express, that you can take R, R2, and you can take that circle, transversal circle, and moreover, you can take the universal cover. And so you end up that the information of that foliation, of that dynamical system, is totally contained in a rank 2 lattice inside R. So the point is that the lattice is rank 2 inside R if H is irrational, and not rank 2 inside R if H is rational. So now you get this kind of R modulo 1 comma H, and it contains the same amount of information as the dynamics of the Kronecker foliation. It's R modulo 1 comma H bar. So the same amount of information. And so we call this 1 comma H bar the quantum lattice. So for the circle, the lattice was generated by 1, and then you get a circle that is but now to get the quantum torus, you put a quantum lattice inside. It's also called a quasi-lattice for a different reason, quasi-crystal. You put a quantum lattice inside the real line, and the quotient is the quantum torus. But because of the existence of this formation map. And this was a clue in Sophia as to some of the elements, some of the most striking elements of the talk that Kyung is going to deliver right after this one. The fact that we use this kind of exponential, that was a clue. Okay, so you, and of course, now you can just say, well, I take CD, I take a lattice, an abelian, free abelian group, typically of rank bigger than D, gamma, they call it a quantum lattice, and divide CD by gamma, and this will be a quantum torus that is Kähler, a Kähler quantum torus. As a stack on an appropriate category of stacks over an appropriate site that we'll find in the paper. So think of CP1. CP1 is the star union 0, union infinity, as Alberto has pointed out very vividly in his talk. And but now he made it go solenoidal. Well, now we're going to make it go quantum tori. He made it go solenoidal there. You got this kind of. We're going to do something similar but different. We're going to make it go quantum tori there. This is going to be the quantum torus. We're going to add 0 and infinity, and this is going to be quantum P1. But of course, what covers P1? What covers quantum P1? The Hopf surface. So we are getting to the non-Kähler geometry. Well, you can do it gluing. That's gluing, you know, that's you glue in this form with the quantum lattice. But you see, you can do it, you can think of it as you have the Hopf surface, and you have this magical foliation in the Hopf surface, that when you take these two things off, it's a Kronecker foliation. So you have this Hopf surface with a completion of the Kronecker foliation inside. You know, this analytic continuation of the Kronecker foliation in the Hopf surface, and this exists, is the LBM foliation for the Hopf surface. But if you take these two things off, it's just a Kronecker foliation, the LBM foliation. So when you take the portion of quantum torus, but with the 2 points, is the Hopf surface divided by this foliation, the LBM foliation, and now you get a quantum P1. The fiber used to be of P1, it used to be an elliptic vibration, another clue as to what we're going to do next. It used to be an elliptic vibration, but now the fiber is a copy of the complex numbers at most points. It's a copy of the complex numbers. So that's what we're saying here. This N is the Hopf surface. CP1 is the Hopf surface, and the H bar is the same Hopf surface essentially. What you move is the foliation as you to get this quotient and get the formation of P1 into quantum P1. You do it with the Hopf surface. And with the complex structure of the Hopf surface, the complex structure of the Hopf surface is important to get P1. So, but of course, you can now do it for the Calabian. And Alberto, Laura and Alberto together in this paper in 2014 proved that this thing that I did for P1, well, you essentially can do it for any, for the rational toric varieties. They do the case that is rational with this A number that Laurent defined, but it's the maximal A number, the maximal number, the maximal A number. Anyway, but of course, now what we do, we liberate the foliation from being closed on itself. It opens up. It becomes a bunch of Kronecker foliations in all sorts of directions on the LBM manifold, and the quotient is a quantum toric variety. So you can do that. And so, well, this is what, and of course, quantum varieties want to have their bands, don't they? And they are the quantum bands. What is the datum to get a quantum toric variety? It's a fan. Now it could have irrational directions, but this direction have to land on the dust of the quantum lattice or the quasi lattice. So you have, in the past, you used to have a Euclidean space, a lattice, and a fan on the lattice. Now you have in the Euclidean space a quantum lattice, a quasi lattice, and a fan on the quasi lattice. And this is the datum that you need to get for every cone a quantum torus. Now, and now it's different quantum tori. In the past, every tori was the same tori, essentially. Now it's a bunch of different quantum tori. Has more datum. And of course, there is one big quantum torus at the center of it all. When you compactify it, you get the quantum toric variety. And the two-fold complex homotopic cover is the LBM menu. The two-fold complex homotopic cover of the quantum toric variety is the LBM menu. So, well, you can do a little bit better. But now, you see, in the forming quantum lattices gets messy. So if you cannot remember how you constructed your quantum lattice with generators, the H, this is like remembering the value of your H bar. In fact, for n equals 1, E is H bar. So now you have this universe where you have a bunch of H bars. This is vector H of H bars. And now it's easy to deform this map H, and this is the coordinate for the modular space of quantum variety. This map H, the so-called calibration. You calibrate the Planck constants in various directions, and as you calibrate the Planck constants in various directions, you can change that calibration, and that will give you good coordinate. Will they singularize the modular space of quantum toric varieties? So it's much better to do it calibrating the Planck. So we call that a calibrated quantum Planck. Sounds a bit technical, but it solves a lot of problems and it desingularizes the modular space. Well, it's in this, from the stack point of view, we get slightly different stacks. One stack is the stack, the more naive stack, and the other one carries a germ that is very good to carry. It's the sort of thing that appeared in the talk of Tony in Sofia just last December, when you put this kind of germ, and it's exactly the same, turning on the germ from the stack point of view. From the geometric point of view, it's just adding for remembering this H map. So, well, then you get the obvious kind of theorem. One, you set up the whole theory. Quantum toric varieties and quantum bands do correspond, and the categories correspond with the maps of quantum bands as maps of quantum toric varieties. And LBM theory is intimately related to quantum toric geometry in that it's the same theory. That is to say, the reasonable hypothesis every quantum toric variety is exactly an LBM many, and vice versa. So the theory that Laurent was talking about in the last talk is the same theory. It's the theory of quantum toric varieties for irrational bands. Laurent pointed out that the LBM manifold knows its foliation. It just knows its foliation. It's seen in the category of LBM manifold. It just knows, and the deformations of LBM manifold, just as the deformations of our variety, as a toric variety, are not the deformations of the variety as a variety. Likewise, the deformations of an LBM manifold as an LBM manifold are not the same as deformations of a LBM manifold as a manifold. And so we have a nice modular space. So, but anyway, LBM here in the irrational case is quantum toric variety. The categories do correspond. They're very functorial. And quantum toric variety is scalar if and only its delta is polytopic. These are things that you would expect from the classical toric case, and indeed, probably now it's harder to use these results from Ishida. Anyway, now we have a nice modular space of quantum toric things. And this modular space has a lot of nice properties. And some of the properties of this modular space depend on the Hodge theory of LBM many. So I'm going to skip that part because I'm running out of time. So they depend on the Hodge. So you would want to study the Hodge theory of the LBM many. And so we catch up from where Laurent left. So Laurent computed the EQ numbers of these LBM manifolds.
Why is related to sandbox?
Some of the counting, some of the combinatorial counting that you would want to control to prove some of the scaling limit in the SciPy is the combinatorial counting for the question. I don't have time to go through all of it, but it's the same combinatorial problem. And so if you can control this kind of thing with this kind of Hodge theory, then you'll be able to prove something very striking in terms of the scaling limit of something. Very striking from that point. Anyway, we're trying, and so you have these Hodge numbers. These are for the polygons. Laurent ended up with a statement for anything, but he did the state this one. You will remember that he said zero combinatorial number Q, I believe, or what was it? He had some zero, but this is the one that is not that has all the things, not only the lower one, and so only in some case will be the zero. So that is the same problem. So you have this thing, and he had this enormous. And now you have these combinatorial numbers. You want to understand what is going on. What is this? What is this saying? What is this saying? So let me try to describe very quickly what this is saying. Because this is I see this and say, my God, this is formula. What is it? What does it mean? Okay, so first, he talked about the process of stabilization. And so if you have the Hopf manifold, you can stabilize it. You can stabilize the Hopf manifold and get to the quasi-Hopf manifold. The important thing to remember about the quasi-Hopf manifold topologically is that while the Hopf manifold is N, in this notation is N, so this is the 2, right? This is N2, what should M be? 1? 2, top. I believe M2, 1, M2, 1, I may make a mistake. N2M topologically, not complex, not as a complex manifold, it just has a bunch of tori. Topology, but it's very different complex manifolds. So stabilization, you just multiply by circles, but it's very, very, very different complex manifolds. Again, no English for stabilization. I messed up already. So HM, HM is N to M. And yeah, H1 is the Hopf surface, that's right. And the Hopf surface times, yeah, it's correct, I think. Miraculous. And so you get the Hopf, in practice, you have the Hopf surface, it's over P1 and you have this elliptic vibration. But you can multiply for a bunch of circles, always even, so that it has a Hopf-Lorentzian complex manifold, and put this magical complex structure of the LDM manifold, and now it goes down still to P1, but now it has a bunch of, in some lucky rational case, a bunch of elliptic curves as the fiber. But then as you deform this, it becomes this extremely complicated foliation. Who knows what is going on? Okay. Nevertheless, the Hodge numbers from the formula that we have, that is a complicated formula, and it's simpler cousin for the Hopf manifold, satisfy the Hodge Pascal pyramid. Namely, you put all the Hodge diamonds one on top of the other, of the various stabilizations of the Hopf manifold, or the Calabi, or really any of them. You put the Hodge diamonds like this. And now, certainly for the Hopf, this is true. You put the Hodge diamond in the Hopf, and then the stabilization, and the stabilization, so on and so forth. You put this pyramid of Hodge diamonds. And whenever you are at a place, you look at the 4 that are above you and you add them. And that's the Hodge number of the new one, of the stabilized. What you have this kind of formula. What do you try to do to try to understand it? Well, you try to see if it is at least has some recursive property, and at least it has this recursive property. So, and this, it's already given away as part of the solution, isn't it? This is kind of the elliptic curve is contributing to get this square and coming down into this place. So,
so why is it a Pascal?
Well, because in Pascal terms you have these 2.
Yeah, I know that.
Here you have the 4 above to get the 1 below. And then you get the 4 here to get the 1 below. And then you add the 4 here to get the 1 below. So with one Hodge diamond, you use the Pascal algorithm and you get the cascade of Hodge diamonds. All the Hodge diamonds. We use one Hodge diamond. The one from the smallest stable case that I was talking about with his talk. And and then you get this kind of problems. Then you start getting kind of right on these formulas. So you say, well, the obvious thing is to put the generating function. And then you remember, the generating function in the algebraic case, not in the non-Kähler case. In the algebraic case, it's called the Hodge-Levin polynomial, isn't it? Of course, I'm not allowed to talk about this here because all these all these disasters with the Hodge numbers. But why not? I'm going to write the generating function and think of it as a Hodge-Levin polynomial. And so I just write this. Of course, now it has that we have no hope of having all the extremely nice properties that this polynomial has for algebraic varieties. Now we have no hope of having of these nice properties. We cannot reasonably expect that. And in the algebraic case, it has a lot of nice properties. It's so-called kind of motivic properties. It's additive, finite covering, multiplicative, Zariski local, and trivial variation. Nice. Very nice. In the algebraic case, in the algebraic variety, in the Kähler case, moreover, I think Kähler, right? Kähler is not right. The Kähler is not. So in the Kähler case, you can do that. So, and now you say, okay, now I'm going to try I'm going to bring the little Donald nodes we all have inside. We're going to do this recursion mathematics, and we're going to try from Laurent's formula expressed here, we're going to try to write a polynomial in a closed form. Miraculously, you can. This is the answer. And how you elliptic curves stare at you. There are elliptic curves all over the place now. So this is very fun. So you try to write it now in different ways. So you get this formula. All that very elaborate formula with combinatorial numbers. To get to this formula, you have to apply the theory of hypergeometric functions. You cannot just from that formula magically get this formula. You have to apply something. And the theory that you apply is more use of over rings of hypergeometric functions and things like that. And you get to this formula using these hypergeometric functions. So you get to the formula. Now you have the formula. And now look, it's so nice, isn't it? Now we have this essentially m minus 1 elliptic curve and something very simple. Let's see. Well, this is the hypergeometric formula of one of the pieces, for example. This is the hypergeometric formula expression, but let me skip it, of one of the pieces. In any case, we have here the quasi-hop. The hop is n equals 1, remember, so it doesn't have this factor. It has only one of this factor, and now it's very little and very nice. This nice little Hodge time. We started in the Hodge, in the Hodge Pascal theorem. So, well, the recursion formula is just union multiplied by elliptic curve, and topologically, that's okay. Of course, from the observation of Laurent, we now know that the numbers are topological. But still, this is a bit too much. This is very nice. It is telling us topologically, that's okay. We get these kind of formulas. And we call the logarithmic transform difference polynomial by definition E of P1 plus E minus H that doesn't exist. The polynomial U times 1 plus B squared. And remember, look at the quotation marks that I wrote. This, of course, doesn't make sense. K0 bar requires algebraic varieties in the inputs. And this is not. Just quotation mark. So like that. Then, well, you have the typical K0 bar. Let me call it a motivic ring, just lazy, out of laziness. And typically, from the results of Pierre Delisle, one can deduce that the polynomial, the Hodge-Delisle polynomial in the algebraic variety case, from the results of Delisle, it follows that in the algebraic geometric case, the polynomial is a nice so-called motivic measure, namely a ring homomorphism from K0 bar to the polynomial ring into variables with integral coefficients. So it's a morphism of this. Nice, very nice. But this requires all these Hodge theory. That is not available in this case, because these are non-Kähler variables. And now, if you believe in this L polynomial that I wrote, the L1, and then you can write the L2, and then you can do kind of a Grabner basis kind of generating thing for the ring, and that kind of thing. And again, these are examples of formulas that you get. And isn't it so tempting to erase the E and write the square parenthesis? It's so tempting to just erase the E, just as a way to calculate quickly. You erase the E, and you just write this square parenthesis. Doesn't it feel that you have here some sort of K0 bar, but it's not possibly true? Isn't it so, doesn't it feel as if this was true? You just write this kind of thing out of a whim. Now you say, well, I'm missing a motivic ring. Where is it? Where is this motivating ring? Where the formulas, these elaborate combinatorial formulas, now behave in this impossibly nice way. I mean, these combinatorial don't have a right to behave like this. It's a horrendous formula, or they behave like this. They don't have a right to have all this infinite amount of combinatorial identity, but they do. But there has to be an explanation. Are we missing some sort of bigger ring M that contains K0? But it cannot possibly be K0 complete manifold. That's nothing. That cannot possibly be the case. That is like K0 double. With any luck, it has the other characteristic and no more than that. So it cannot be K0 complete manifold. That's too small. We need a bigger ring than K0 to make these formulas true. And these formulas true. And now the logarithmic mean transform has a motivic expression. But isn't this so weird? You know, I mean, the logarithmic transform is not, has no hope of giving you algebraic varieties into algebraic varieties. And now you have these kind of formulas that are extremely nice. And you have even more. Even in the unstable case, you can do this kind of dirty tricks with the quotation marks and recover the right answer. Even in the unstable case. You can do this kind of tricks. And there was no hope in the unstable for these methods of computation to work. Yet, this gives the correct answer. So something is going on. But you'll have to wait for the next step to know what's going on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.